Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Rajiv Kamal Kumar from AN Sinha Institute of Social Studies, Patna. Today we are going to learn the module on Denotified tribe from the paper Tribal Culture of India. Learning objectives. At the end of the module, the student will able to identify denotified as well as other categories of tribe to classify the criminals of India and to explain about the denotified tribes and their characteristics. Next objective of this module is to explain the role of caste system in propagation of denotified tribes. And the last objective of this module is to understand the importance of the welfare of denotified tribes in India. Tribes may be defined as collection of families or groups of families bearing a common name, which as a rule does not denote any specific occupation, generally claiming common descent from a mythical or historical ancestor, and it is occasionally from an animal, but in some parts of the country held together rather by obligation of kinship, usually speaking the same language and occupying or profess to occupy a definite tract of the country. Thus, a tribe is a cluster of families having common family name, common descent, kinship obligation, common language, common territory, and a common religion, which is oftenly very rudimentary form of religion. The tribes in India are of two kinds. The first is criminal tribe, who are comprised of those people who traditionally follow and practice criminal activities as their profession. This category is called also as denotified tribes or Vimukt Jati in Hindi, after the result of the Criminal Tribes Act and enacting the Habitual Offenders Act of 1952. The second category of tribe is non-criminal tribes. All the tribes except denotified tribes are come under non-criminal tribes. Non-criminal tribes are those those group of tribals bearing a common descent from a mythical or any historical ancestor. However, these tribes do not accept criminal means of livelihood as their profession. This category constitutes the present day scheduled tribes who enjoy special privileges under the Constitution of India. There would be no crime. Whenever a criminal law is passed and enforced, acts that were not crimes previously then become crimes. However, according to law, crime may be defined as the commission or omission of an act which the law forbids or commands under the pain of a punishment to be imposed by the state by a proceeding in its own name. In other words, the state has the responsibility of taking action against the criminals. Thus, one may say that a criminal is one who has committed a crime and is found guilty by a court of law. Criminal tribes were treated as born criminals and were subject to vigilant watch by the government officials beginning in 1871, the year the first Criminal Tribes Act was enacted, their freedom of movement was restricted until the Criminal Tribe Act was repealed in the year 1952. The state has the responsibility of taking action against the criminals. Thus, one may say that a criminal is one who has committed a crime and found guilty by the rule of law. According to Hackerwall, the criminals in India could be classified into four different groups. The first one is the incorrigible. The incorrigible is one who deliberately chooses crimes as a profession. The incorrigible finds it a profitable and easy way of obtaining a livelihood, though he is given an opportunity to earn an honest livelihood, he will never take it because he does not believe in the honesty. He does not always commit crimes himself. More frequently, after a successful career of crime, he employs others to execute his plans and sees that the punishment falls upon them and not upon him. His own immunity from punishment hardens him in his career of crime. He persuades people to commit crime and is always on the lookout to make sure that no member in his federation gives up his profession. He is fully familiar with the secrets of crime and imparts his knowledge freely because he is so organized that he cannot be easily apprehended by the police. The second category of criminals in India is the habitual criminal. The habitual criminal, like the incorrigible criminals, is one who commits crimes continually. He is to a large extent the victim of circumstances and economic stress, and he cannot escape from the profession of crime. When one or more convictions are against his name, reformation is impossible. The third category of criminal is the accidental criminals. Accidental criminal is a very careless type of individual. He is neither a professional criminal like the incorrigible, nor does he commit criminal crimes as a habit without being much or intended. The last category of criminal is the criminal tribes or the criminal caste. This category, also known as denotified tribe, are neither habitual offenders nor they are incorrigible, though they accepted crime as a profession. This section of people traditionally follows criminal activities to obtain their livelihood. A brief history of criminal tribes or denotified tribes. Now, the use of the term criminal or denotified is derogatory, but it finds mention in the literature. The earliest history of the criminal tribe is not known. However, we have the views of various ethnographers and anthropologists such as Risley, Gourier, and others who concluded that the tribes were the original inhabitants of their country in which they lived. Professor Warrior Erwin called the Vaigas of Madhya Pradesh as one of the criminal tribes, and they are the original owners of the Vaiga land in Madhya Pradesh. The exact origin of the criminal tribes is not known. Our purpose here is not concerned with the tribal origin but to know when these tribes came into considered as criminal tribe. Sher Singh in his study noted that the criminal tribes were first dealt with the regulation of 1773 and finally in the year 1871 officially recognized as an illegal social organization. They were shown as a separate category for the first time in the year 1901 In the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871, the government proceeded on three basic assumptions. First one is all persons born in a particular group or caste would become criminals from their birth because they take up their father's profession, that is of criminal activity. The second is when once they learn such law violating behavior, they will always continue to be criminals because they believe it to be a profession. And third, because of continuous criminal practices, they become hardened criminals. The Act is provided for registering all the members of the tribes declared as criminal tribes. This Act also required that the registered members have to report themselves at the police authority and notify their place of residence. The Act authorized the authority to restrict any criminal tribe or his movements to any specified area, and whenever he crosses the limits to which his movements were restricted, even for few hours or for an innocent purpose, they were subject to punishment of imprisonment for longer duration and also a fine which may extend up to rupees 500 or $67 at that time. However, this approach of the government was very wrong and was criticized. It postulated that the criminal tribes represented a group of born criminals and that crime was hereditary with their members and that criminals could be reformed by ruthless punishment and lifelong harassment. Denotified tribes were of two kinds, which may broadly be classified into nomadic group and settled communities. The nomadic group includes gypsy, while the settled and the semi-settled groups trace their descent from irregular fighting clans who were uprooted from their original homes on account of invasion or political upheavals in the distant past. Under the Criminal Tribes Act of 1924, these groups, which numbered about 127 and whose population was about 24.64 lakhs in 1951, were dubbed as criminal tribes. Thus, when a child was born of these tribes, he was considered to be a criminal by birth, even though he might have been totally innocent. These people were kept in colonies, sometimes fenced with barbed wire and under strict vigilance of the police. Quite often, they were made scapegoats for undetected crimes. In these settlements, the registered persons were interned for a prescribed period of time during which they were taught agriculture or certain handicrafts or any other skill. The movement of these settlers were restricted within that area. Thus, these notified groups had to wear dark cloak of notoriety around them. This deprived them to all the channels of employment. These people were bound by their own morals. They were physically well built and mentally very sound. They seemed to have their own standards which they observed scrupulously. The Bamta steals neither during the daytime nor from the body of a person who is asleep. The Taguj of Karnal, the Sonarias and the Audhyas, on the other hand, steal in the daytime near the night. The Bamtas and the Sonarias never steal in their own villages. The Burias usually rob the well-to-do as they detest depriving the poor of their hard-earned income. Minaj of Shahjahanpur give plenty to all those who come to them for alms. The charity of the Minaj in Sadabrat is perpetual and invites all comers to partake in it. They have their own code of conduct. That is, the criminals have their own code of conduct and secret dialect to communicate with each other in the performance of their work. This code of conduct was strictly followed by the group of criminals. Contravening these rules met with severe social disapproval, which was a stronger sanction than laws. After the independence, the national government realized the injustice of dubbing the whole community as criminal without exception. Apart from being repugnant to the fundamental principles of jurisprudence, it was socially unjustifiable and nationally wasteful to maintain a whole community generation after generation in bondage and dubbed as criminals. The government therefore appointed a criminal tribes inquiry committee in the year 1949, just after the independence, and on the recommendation of this committee, the Criminal Tribe Act with was implemented with effect from August 31, 1952, and the sanctions which were made earlier were also removed and the restrictions imposed on these people were withdrawn. Some characteristics of the criminal tribes are: the Bhamtaj are railway thieves par excellence. The another category of tribe, the Meenaj of the Punjab, UP and Rajasthan are more prone of dacoity, which is preceded by a heavy pelting of stones. The third tribe, the Kalan, considered robbery a duty and a right sanctioned by the descent, or it is the family business. The next tribe is Jandana, are swindlers who pretend to turn metals into gold. Another example of criminal tribe is the Gopalas, who are engaged themselves only in the cattle stealing. The Mangarodiyas are cattle poisoners, and cattle lifters. Similarly, the Kolis commonly steal only bullocks and buffaloes, and the previous tribe, Mangroids, steal goats and sheep. The Lamanis kidnap women and children. Another criminal tribe, the Boryas, engaged only in house burglary and cattle stealing at night. They are expert at wrenching jewelry of the persons who are in sleep. The radius of their burglary is beyond 50 miles of their village. Some other examples of criminal tribes and their criminal activity, such as the Wadal tribe, would be stealing all the edible, including food, fall, egg. A Barbar tribe would commit theft after sunset or before sunrise, would readily surrender before the law. The warriors sometimes poses as members of the caste and manage to marry their daughters to well-to-do people, whom afterwards they plunder in collusion with them, with their daughters. Similarly, the Shunarias are daytime pickpockets and petty thieves. The Sasi tribe often disguise themselves as constables and in the course of a mock search rob the travelers. The Harnis are adept at masquerading as religious mendicants or sannyasi. The Kasi Kadis who take to robbery and dacoity disguise themselves as Lingayat priests, fortune tellers, medicine men, or shepherds to pick up information from from the people. The Chandravadi will often disguise himself as a woman and travel in the third class women's carriages and carry on his trade. A peculiar social system known as the caste system was developed The caste became the shadow of the individual. The caste never ended until the person died. An individual is born into certain caste and lived in it throughout his life and died in it. The caste was ascribed by birth. The strict caste system was maintained by strict observance of rules such as prohibiting intercaste marriages, interdining, and drinking, fixed occupation, fixed inheritance, ordering of status, and restricted social intercourse. This system divided the society into several thousand mutually exclusive, non overlapping, and permanent social units. Nobody was allowed to go out of the social limits into which he was born. This led other groups and tribes to follow the same pattern since they were under the influence of the caste system. Out of 10 people, if 9 persons lived as mutually exclusive and permanent individuals, then the 10th member would automatically become another exclusive unit. The same principle applied to the tribes also. After some generations, the tribes also acquired the characteristics of caste, such as prohibition of intercaste marriages, ascribed status by birth, etc. The caste system was strengthened and non social mobility was now possible. A child born to Vaishya caste, that is trading community, automatically becomes a Vaishya, and a son of a criminal tribe naturally become a criminal. So, without having any guilt in their minds, the tribes became criminals as well. The caste system produced merely 4 million criminal tribes because of its nature and function. Welfare of denotified tribes in India. The Backward Class Commission in the year 1955 has recommended that the nomenclature of this class of people may be changed from criminal to denotified communities. These communities may be divided into scheduled tribes, scheduled castes, and other backward classes for getting the benefits available to these categories. These communities may be distributed in small groups in towns and villages where they will ultimately come in the contact with other people and will eventually be assimilated in society. Normal instruction together with basic education followed by vocational and technical education at secondary level should be given to them. The children of the criminal groups should be removed from their family business of crime on attaining the age of 7 and should be put in suitable hostels for their education and development. After the legal withdrawal of the limitations and restrictions in the year 1952, the first problem was to wean this tribal group or caste group who were known as criminals from the criminal tendencies, particularly the younger generation, and removed the stigma attached to them. And secondly, to put before them opening to useful occupations which would make it possible for them to live honorably. The total allotment under the first 5-year plan, both at the center and for the states, for these communities and other backward classes was rupees 3.5 crores, and about 17 settlements and 30 colonies were set up. 113 cooperatives were also organized, and 337 industrial centers were set up for their benefits. The second 5-year plan made an allocation of rupees 3.12 crores for the welfare of these denotified communities. The major schemes were housing and educational development, economic development, and social progress of these communities were given due emphasis, for which around 400 lakhs were made available in the fourth 5-year plan. The pattern of implementation of schemes was again changed in the fifth plan period when all the welfare schemes for the denotified tribes were transferred to the state plan sector. These schemes were continued to be implemented in the further 5-year plans by the respective center and state governments. The scheme include educational programs in the forms of granting of scholarships and stipends to eligible students and provisions of midday meals and establishment of ashram schools, residential schools and hostels, programs for economic development, rehabilitation, colonialization, assistance for agriculture and cooperative societies were made. In view of the small results achieved so far, their needs should be studied in each area and programs could be drawn up on the basis of the following suggestions made by a study team on the planned projects. The first suggestion given by the committee was the need for a combined correctional and welfare approach for the rehabilitation of denotified communities, which should be supported by a program of social education. The second recommendation was formulation of special economic programs which kept in view the character of the population, in particular their adventurous spirit and traditional skills. The third recommendation was organization of industrial and other cooperatives. The fourth recommendation was provision of opportunities for employment in the public services supported by way of additional training and orientation facilities. And the last recommendation was where the denotified tribes constitute a sizable population, cadres of trained workers who are familiar with their social and cultural background and can work closely with them should be built up. The objective of assimilation, emphasized by the third plan, should guide the program of rehabilitation and development from the very start, and progressive and forward looking elements among the denotified tribes themselves should be assisted and encouraged to play an increasing part in this effort. The denotified tribes are entitled to certain benefits and concessions under the general provisions of the Article 41 of the Constitution of India, which stipulates the promotion of educational and economic interests of the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other weaker sections of the society. It is desirable that the various safeguards, concessions, and benefits available to the scheduled castes and tribes should be extended to them also under the statutory provisions to be made by the Parliament through an amendment of the Constitution. There is also the need to identify their complex problems which vary from state to state due to their habitation, ecology, traditions, and cultural ethos, and to find their remedies, especially to their rehabilitation in vocations suited to their genius, and to wean them away from their criminal tendencies, particularly the children. This can be achieved to a great extent by formulating comprehensive and integrated plans to provide them land and the financial facilities in the form of loans, subsidies for the agriculture, agro-based cottage industries, housing, education, and other development programs. The voluntary organizations have been playing appreciable role in their rehabilitation and welfare. They need to be involved in large measures to complement the government efforts in ameliorating the lot of the denotified tribes with a view to integrate them in the mainstream of the Indian society and enable them to live as a respectable citizen of this country. So, students, now let us summarize what we have discussed and learned from the module on denotified tribe. The criminality of these denotified tribes was a social product and it did not evolve overnight. It was neither inherited quality nor was a planned with malicious intention. Most of the criminal tribes seem to be original inhabitants of their respective areas in which they lived. All these people gradually, after a generation or so, identified themselves as tribal criminal, but when legally recognized as criminal tribe in the year 1871, after the enactment of the Criminal Tribes Act in that year, these tribes lost their land and properties to foreign invaders such as Aryans, Dravidians, and Muslims. They became helpless and hapless and hopeless due to the defeat by the invaders. Having lost their lands and properties and whatever resources they have for their living, they were left with no source of income and therefore they resorted to illegal means of earning a livelihood through the criminal activities. These people had no particular profession but they lived by means of nefarious activities. Socio-economic condition of these denotified tribes are responsible for becoming them criminals, and it is not by birth. Though originally they were not criminals, were a period of time through changing circumstances they became poor. As such, they were forced to take up certain activities which were easy for earning their livelihood, but the wage of earning the livelihood was not legally correct, and gradually caste system strengthened and the exclusive groups have been developed, thus keeping them in their social groups, continuing their criminal activities. Thank you.